The bay door didn't creak. It simply stopped existing, and something began to move through the gap. Sensor Prime Ven's hands hovered an inch above his console. He did not touch it. He had learned in the last 4 minutes that touching things did not help. The freighter had been sitting at the edge of the gray reach for 6 hours, quiet as a held breath. Now its belly had opened like a wound, and the first shape slid out into the dark, 40 meters of hull, matte black, moving without a sound. No warning. No hail. No mercy. Then a second shape, a third, a fourth. "Admiral," Ven said, and his voice did not sound like his own. "I need you to look at this." Admiral Tharvok did not look. 900 years of command had taught him that panic in a subordinate's voice was usually panic in a subordinate's imagination. He kept his eyes on the freighter's hull, waiting for it to be what it had claimed to be. A freighter. Something small. Something he understood. "It was not small anymore, the identification codes," Ven said. "Admiral, they're already flagged in our own registry. Every one of them, logged as civilian traffic, logged as harmless." Tharvok's scaled hand closed around the rail of his command chair. Somewhere behind him on the wall he never looked at hung an old data slate with a crack running through its screen. Words on it that he had never bothered to read twice. "Do not pursue Section 12. The fifth ship came through the bay door." Then the feed cut to static, and the chamber went silent except for the low hum of the cooling vents, and nobody on the bridge of the Eternal Vigil said anything at all. I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close. 14 minutes earlier, none of this had seemed possible. The chamber had smelled of ozone and political certainty, the two smells Tharvok associated with a good day. He stood at the viewing port of the Eternal Vigil, watching 147 Varathi warships hold formation around a single unremarkable point in the Grey Reach. The sector was quiet, dust and dead stars. Off limits for reasons nobody currently serving remembered. His empire had held this arm of the galaxy for 6,200 years. Borders were absolute, nothing crossed without permission. He had never lost an engagement, and he did not plan to start his 10th century of service by losing to a freighter. Admiral Captain Kale stepped up beside him, young for his rank, hungry, in the way young officers always were. 400 years old and still convinced that every problem had a weapons-based solution. The human vessel is requesting docking clearance. "I recommend we deny it and board by force. Take the crew for questioning. Patience, Kale." Tharvok did not turn from the port. "Let's hear what it wants first." The human's face appeared on the main display a moment later. 54 years old, salt and pepper hair, a smile that lived only in his eyes. He wore a flight jacket the color of old leather, with a coffee stain on the left sleeve that no one had bothered to clean. "Admiral Tharvok." The human's voice was calm, almost friendly. "Captain Nolan Graves, Terran Space Corps, requesting docking permission for routine maintenance. Our quantum drive's acting up. Figure will be here about 12 hours. Kale's claws flexed against the rail. "You have no authorization to be in Imperial space." Graves tapped his index finger twice against the arm of his chair, a small habit, before he answered. "I know. Figured that'd be a problem. That's why I'm asking." Tharvok studied the human's face for a long moment. There was no fear in it, no pleading, just a man waiting the way a man waits for a kettle to boil, entirely unbothered by the 147 warships aimed at his hull. "That should have told him something." "Denied," Tharvok said. "You will hold position and power down your engines. My ships will inspect your vessel." "Understood, Admiral." Graves did not argue. He did not even blink. He simply nodded once, like a man agreeing to a minor inconvenience, and the display went dark. Ven's console beeped, soft and insistent, the kind of sound that meant a number had come back wrong. "Admiral." Ven kept his hands above the controls, not on them. "The freighter's mass signature just resolved. It's 3.1 million metric tons." Kale snorted. "That's absurd for a vessel that size, I know, sir." Ven's breath caught audible even across the chamber. "That's 2.4 times what a freighter of its class should mass." "I don't have an explanation." Tharvok's gaze flicked, without meaning to, toward the old data slate mounted on the wall behind his chair. Cracked screen. Faded ink. "Do not pursue. Section 12. He had inherited it from Elder Morris' private archive along with a dozen other relics nobody had time for. He had always assumed the old historian was simply afraid of empty space. The way elders sometimes were. He dismissed the thought again now, the way he always did. Run a full diagnostic on your sensors, he told Ven. Assume malfunction until proven otherwise. Already run twice, Admiral. Ven's hand still hadn't touched the console. The reading holds, Kale laughed, short and sharp. Then the humans are hauling rock. Or lying about their cargo manifest. Either way, it changes nothing. We board, we search, we move on. Agreed, Tharvok said. Prep a boarding party. He allowed himself for just a moment the small satisfaction of a decision made. 900 years of command had never once required him to doubt his own instincts, and he saw no reason to begin today, in a dead sector, over a freighter with a coffee-stained captain and a mass reading that had to be a sensor glitch. Behind him, unnoticed, the old data slate caught the light and went dark again, its crack running through 6 words nobody on that bridge had ever taken seriously. The boarding party never made it aboard. Shuttle 7 crossed the 12,000 kilometers in silence. 4 Varathi Marines strapped into crash seats, weapons charged. Ven watched their transponder blip crawl across his display, steady, unremarkable, right up until it wasn't. Admiral. His hand still hadn't touched the console. 3 hours of this, and he'd started to wonder if they ever would again. Shuttle 7 stopped. Stopped how? Just stopped. No damage signature. No debris. The engines are still running. It's just not moving. Kale leaned over the tactical display, jaw tight, some kind of tractor field. There's no field, sir. Nothing's holding it. It's simply not going anywhere. Tharvok said nothing for a long moment. He had commanded fleets across 12 conquered worlds, and in 9 centuries he had learned that silence from the enemy was rarely silence at all. It was a held breath before a much louder sound. Recall the shuttle, he said. Kale blinked. Admiral, we haven't even... Recall it. The shuttle came about without protest, thrusters flaring blue against the dark, and slid back toward the eternal vigil at ordinary speed, as if nothing at all had happened, as if it had simply changed its mind. That was somehow worse than if it had been destroyed. Graves's voice came through the open channel a moment later, unbothered as ever. Admiral, that's my ship's proximity system. Doesn't like unscheduled visitors. Nothing personal. You will explain that technology, Tharvok said. I'd love to, Admiral. Above my pay grade, honestly. A pause and the sound of something being set down. A mug, maybe, ceramic on metal. You want my advice? Let's just call this a misunderstanding. I finish my maintenance. I head home. Everybody keeps their dignity. Kale's claws scraped the rail. This is a provocation. Might be. Graves agreed, easy as anything. Or it might be me trying to save you some trouble. Tharvok turned from the port for the first time in an hour, on the wall behind his chair. The cracked data slate sat where it always sat, screen dark, 6 words nobody read waiting under a thin layer of dust. He did not look at it now either. He looked at Kale instead. Fire a warning shot, he said. Secondary battery. Make the point without making a mistake. Kale's grin came fast and hungry. He'd been waiting an hour for permission to do something with his hands. The shot crossed the gap in under a second. A single pulse of directed energy that had ended 3 enemy cruisers in the last real engagement the 7th Fleet had fought. It struck the freighter's hull dead center. Nothing happened. Not nothing as in a miss. Nothing as in the light simply stopped a few meters short of the hull and folded in on itself, bending around some shape Ven's sensors couldn't draw, and then it was gone, absorbed into whatever the freighter actually was. Admiral? Ven's voice had gone thin. The shield. It's not a barrier. I don't have a word for what it's doing. It's redirecting the energy somewhere. I can't tell you where. That's not possible, Kale said to no one. I'm reading it in front of me, sir, and I still don't believe it. Graves's voice returned, and for the first time there was something under the calm, something patient and a little tired, like a man repeating himself to a child who wouldn't stop touching the stove. Admiral, I'm going to recommend you stand down. I know you're following orders, but those orders are old. Older than you think. Explain yourself? Your intelligence on human capability. A pause, the sound of fingers tapping twice against something hard. It hasn't been updated. Not really, not since the last time anybody bothered to look. Tharvok's blood ran colder than it had in 900 years. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Admiral. Waste of time. Graves's tone didn't rise, it never rose. You've got about 3 minutes before I lose my patience with this conversation. The channel cut. Silence again, and this time nobody in the chamber pretended it was comfortable. Kale's hand had drifted to his sidearm without seeming to notice it had moved there. Ven hovered his palms over the console like a man warming them at a fire that had stopped giving heat. "Scan the freighter," Tharvok said. "Full spectrum, now." It took 12 seconds. Ven would remember later that it had felt much longer. "Admiral, there's something inside the hull. Moving. Smaller than the freighter. Much heavier." "How much heavier?" "I don't have a clean number, sir. It's not one mass. It's several." Tharvok stepped closer to the viewing port. Close enough that his breath fogged the transparent alloy, an old and useless habit from a body that hadn't needed to breathe on anything cold in decades. Out in the dark, the freighter sat exactly where it had sat for 6 hours, patient, unmoving, its running lights blinking in the same lazy rhythm they'd blinked since it arrived. "It's not a freighter," Ven said, and his breath caught audibly on the last word, the way it had twice already tonight. "I think it's a shell. I think there's a warship inside it." Kale laughed, but it came out wrong, too high, more question than sound. "One warship against 147 of ours." "I didn't say one," Ven said quietly. On the tactical display, something that had been reading as a single contact for 6 hours began, very slowly, to split apart into shapes that hadn't been there a moment ago and kept splitting, and did not stop. 47, Ven said, and the number landed in the chamber like a dropped weight. "I'm reading 47 distinct signatures now, Admiral, and the count is still climbing." Kale's hand had found his sidearm fully now, gripping it without drawing it, a man holding onto something solid because the rest of the room had stopped making sense. 47 ships. From one freighter, not from the freighter. Ven's fingers finally touched his console, keying through a rapid cascade of data. Each contact carries its own identification code, and every code is already in our registry, Admiral. Logged. Cleared. "You're telling me we've been giving docking clearance to warships for 200 years. I'm telling you we've been giving docking clearance to warships that chose to look like something else." The tactical display kept updating. "Filed as civilian traffic that's passed through Imperial space over the last 2 centuries. Tharvok's 4-fingered hand curled against the rail hard enough that a claw scored a thin line into the metal. Red contacts blooming across the gray reach like frost spreading on glass, each one massing far heavier than anything registered as civilian had a right to. Tharvok watched his own fleet's formation, 147 ships he had trusted an hour ago, now looking suddenly terribly finite. Kale turned from the display, and for the first time all night his voice had lost its hunger. He reached instead for the mug of stone tea that had gone cold on the console edge 2 hours earlier, the same mug he reached for every crisis out of a habit older than the war itself, and drank from it without tasting it. "Orders, Admiral." Tharvok didn't answer right away because his hands needed something to do that wasn't gripping the rail. "Hold formation," he said finally. "Nobody fires without my order, and if they fire first, then we'll know." Graves's voice returned to the open channel, unhurried as ever, though something in it now carried a weight it hadn't before. "Admiral, I imagine your sensor officer's given you a number by now." 47, Tharvok said, "because there was no use pretending otherwise. 47 that we've let you see." A pause, brief, almost gentle. "I'd ask you not to do the math on the rest." Kale's jaw worked. "He's lying. No species builds a fleet like this in secret. Not from us. Not from anyone paying attention," Graves said. "You stopped paying attention 300 years ago, Admiral." Tharvok's gaze drifted, unbidden, to the wall behind his chair, to the cracked data slate he hadn't touched in years, and for the first time in 9 centuries he found himself wanting to read it again, all the way through. "Around the time you decided we weren't worth a second look." The words settled over the chamber and did not lift. Instead of skimming past the 6 words at the top the way he always had, he didn't move toward it. Not yet. "Sir," Ven's voice cut through, urgent now. No hovering hands left in him, only motion. "The 47 ships aren't advancing. They've locked position along our flanks. All of them, simultaneously. A blockade," Kale said. "A cage," Ven corrected. Tharvok looked out at the dark, at 147 Varathi warships that had arrived to inspect one obsolete freighter and now found themselves ringed on every side by vessels that had spent 2 centuries pretending to be nothing at all. Somewhere in that ring sat the silent vigil, patient as ever, its running lights blinking the same lazy rhythm they always had. "They haven't fired," he said, mostly to himself. 47 ships in position to end us, and not one shot. "They're not here to end us," Ven said. "I don't think they ever were." "Then what are they here for?" Nobody answered that. The silence stretched, thick enough that Tharvok could hear his own hearts working, one after the other. An old rhythm that had never once faltered in battle and now felt unfamiliar in his chest. Graves broke it. "Admiral, I've got a question for you. Just the one." Tharvok's throat was dry. "Ask it. That old chart on your wall, the one with the crack running through it." A pause, and somewhere behind the calm, something almost like sympathy. "You ever read past the first line?" The chamber went cold in a way the recyclers had nothing to do with. Kale looked between the Admiral and the dark screen mounted behind his chair. Confusion plain on his face, a young officer watching his commander's certainty crack for the first time in 400 years of service under him. Tharvok crossed the chamber himself, slowly, and lifted the data slate off its mount. His claws left faint scratches in the dust that had gathered along its edge. He had carried this thing for decades without once turning it over to read what came after the warning. He turned it over now. The second line was longer than the first. It was a name, a date, and a single sentence that had waited 300 years to be read by someone who finally understood what it meant. The name was Elder Morath's own. The date was 3 centuries old. Beneath them ran a single sentence, longer than the warning above it, written in the same cramped hand. "We found their outpost first. They let us leave. We are not going back, and neither should you." Tharvok stood holding the slate for a long moment, and the chamber held its silence around him the way a held breath holds itself before it has to be released. "It wasn't a warning," he said mostly to himself. "It was a report." Kale stepped closer, close enough to read over the Admiral's shoulder, and for the first time all night his voice lost its hunger entirely. "That's Elder Morath's authorization glyph. And she came home, with a warning nobody read past the first line, with a report nobody wanted to believe." Tharvok turned the slate over once more in his hands, feeling the crack under his thumb where it had always sat, ignored, because believing it meant admitting we'd already lost this argument once, a very long time ago, and simply hadn't noticed. Graves's voice returned through the open channel, quieter now than it had been through the whole engagement. "She commanded the Third Fleet before either of us was hatched. She commanded it into this exact sector," Tharvok said. 300 years ago, mounted on a wall like a decoration instead of a message, stripped of the easy patience it had carried since the first hail. "She found us 3 centuries back, Admiral. Same as you did tonight, more or less. Same sector. If the old charts still track, we let her fleet go home because we weren't ready to be found yet. She spent what was left of her life trying to get your empire to turn that chart over and read the rest of it. As far as I can tell, you're the first one who did." Kale's claws had gone still against the grip of his sidearm, some argument dying in him before it reached his mouth. "Preparing does." A pause, unhurried, the sound of something ceramic being set down against metal, the same small domestic noise that had punctuated the whole conversation. 300 years! You've been preparing this entire time. Waiting, Graves said. "There's a difference if you sit with it long enough." "A difference in what?" "Waiting doesn't need a reason." As if the man on the other end of it were sitting in his own kitchen instead of the bridge of a warship disguised as scrap. "We had 300 years and nowhere in particular we needed to be. So we got good at looking like we weren't." Tharvok set the data slate down on the console rail, gently, the way a man sets down something he has only just understood was never disposable. Outside the viewing port, the 47 ships held their positions along the flanks of the 7th Fleet, patient as stones, not one of them drifting so much as a meter out of the line they'd locked into. "You could have ended my fleet an hour ago," Tharvok said. "Could have," Graves agreed. "Didn't want to. 147 crews out there, Admiral. Sons and daughters somewhere who'd like to see them come home in one piece, same as mine would like to see me." Something in his voice for just a moment wasn't calm anymore. It was tired, in the way of a man who has been ready for a fight for 300 years and still takes no pleasure in the idea of it landing. "There's a young pilot on your lead cruiser, 19 years old by your reckoning, first deployment. I imagine she'd rather be somewhere else tonight too." Ven's hands went still on the console. He hadn't known that detail. He didn't ask how Graves did. Tharvok's throat worked once before he answered. "After that, I stopped being able to promise anybody comes home." Kale looked to his commander, waiting for the order every instinct in 400 years of training had prepared him to give. "Hold the line, return fire." "You've had eyes inside my fleet. We've had eyes on this whole sector for longer than either of us wants to think about." Graves's tone gentled, the closest thing to sympathy the channel had carried all night. You've got 3 minutes to signal a full withdrawal, Admiral. Take the fight to whatever was out there rather than run from it blind. His hand had not left his sidearm since the shield first swallowed their warning shot. Tharvok didn't give that order. Signal the fleet, he said instead. Full withdrawal. All ships, immediate, no formation delay. Admiral. Kale's voice cracked on the word, more shock than defiance. I have commanded this fleet for 900 years, Kale. Tharvok did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The chamber had gone so quiet that even a whisper would have carried to the far wall. In 900 years, I have never once needed to ask what I was standing against before giving an order. Tonight, I'm asking. He turned to the console instead and keyed the withdrawal order himself, his claws trembling faintly against the controls in a way Tharvok pretended not to notice. That should tell you more than any explanation I could give you. Kale's jaw worked, some last protest rising and then dying unspoken. Because pretending not to notice was the last mercy left to offer a young officer whose whole understanding of strength had just come apart in one evening. Across the Grey Reach, 147 Varathi warships began, one by one, to come about. It happened faster than Tharvok expected, and slower than his hearts wanted. The 47 ships along the flanks did not move to intercept, did not so much as adjust their bearing, only watched, patient as they had been from the first moment their bay doors opened. Formation discipline held even in retreat, that at least hadn't broken, the great bronze hulls of the 7th Fleet turning in careful sequence, engines flaring blue-white as each vessel fell into the withdrawal vector. Nobody fired. Nobody so much as charged a weapon. As an empire that had ruled this arm of the galaxy for 6,000 years turned its back on a single obsolete freighter. Ven watched the last Varathi contact clear the boundary of the Grey Reach and only then let his hands come to rest flat against the console, no longer hovering above it, no longer needing to brace for whatever the readings might say next. Admiral. His voice had steadied into something almost gentle, the clinical edge gone out of it entirely. They're not pursuing. None of them. They're holding position exactly where they locked in. They don't need to pursue, Tharvok said. We already know where we stand. Pursuing would only be for show, and I don't think that species bothers with shows. Kale looked out at the retreating dark, at the shapes of his own fleet growing smaller against the void, and said very quietly the only honest thing he'd said all night. I don't understand why they let us leave. Neither do I, Tharvok admitted. I suspect I'll spend what's left of my life failing to. Graves's voice came through the channel one final time, and there was no triumph in it, nothing that sounded like a man who had won something and wanted it noted. Safe travels, Admiral. Tharvok stood at the viewing port a long while after the last of his fleet had cleared the sector, watching the silent vigil sit exactly where it had sat all night, running lights blinking in that same unhurried rhythm. I hope neither of us has reason to meet again, and if we do— a pause, the faint clink of the mug again set down for the last time. Then I imagine you'll already know better than to open with a warning shot. The channel closed, and this time it did not reopen. As though 6 hours of near annihilation had cost it nothing at all. He thought of the pilot Graves had named without being asked. 19 years old, first deployment. Somewhere on the lead cruiser right now, breathing easier than she had any right to expect an hour ago. He thought of Elder Morath, 3 centuries dead, who had tried to hand him the truth on a cracked screen and been ignored for the better part of a lifetime because ignoring it had been easier than rewriting 900 years of certainty. He had the data slate moved to his private quarters that same night, and he did not mount it on a wall this time. He kept it on the desk where he would see it every morning, crack running through Elder Morath's handwriting, 6 words at the top and 1 long sentence beneath that he read again before he slept, trying and failing to understand a patience that had simply outlasted his. He would draft 3 explanations over the years that followed. A hidden shipyard somewhere past the charted edge of the Reach. An alliance with some older, stranger power that had lent the humans technology they hadn't built themselves. A single catastrophic failure in every sensor across his fleet, some flaw that would never repeat and therefore could never be proven wrong. He would discard each one in turn because none of them accounted for the plainest truth sitting on his desk each morning, that a species he had dismissed as harmless had simply been willing to wait 300 years longer than he had thought to look. Ven wrote his log entry in the small, quiet hour after the bridge had cleared, Kale already gone to his own quarters without another word, Tharvok gone to his with the old slate, carried under one arm like something fragile. Ven typed slowly, The way a man chooses words when some part of him already suspects they will outlast the hand that wrote them. No one believed their censors, he wrote, and then the second ship dropped out, and the third, and the fourth, and we stopped counting. He did not write anything after that line. He read it back once, decided it needed nothing more, and closed the log. Kale, alone in his own quarters 2 decks down, sat for a long time with his sidearm on the table in front of him, unfired, and did not touch it again that night. The Varathi Empire had measured strength in fleets for 6,000 years. It had never once measured a species that measured its own strength in centuries of quiet waiting, and by the time it learned to, the lesson had already been delivered without a single shot fired. In the dark beyond the Grey Reach, the silent vigil powered down its running lights, one by one, until there was nothing left to see at all.